Very worthwhile Antiques voucher, which you can then exchange for an item or several items of your own choice. So good luck with that. That's the end of our visit to St Ives. Next week we're taking the roadshow north of the border. We're off to Scotland. So I do hope you'll join us then. And until then, from all of us here in Cambridgeshire, goodbye.
The Antiques Roadshow regrets that the experts cannot give evaluations by post. In a few moments, we've an extended early evening news, which means that we won't be showing our scheduled programme, OK2 Talk Feelings.
Sunday on BBC1 and at 6:40, Songs of Praise comes from Dunblane Cathedral. At 7:15, Only Fools and Horses, and Rodney's depressed.
I've got this horrible feeling that if there is such a thing as reincarnation, knowing my luck, I'll come back as me.
Lovejoy's got the answer at 8:05.
1749.
How can you be so precise?
Well, we have our ways. One of them being it's carved on it, just there.
At 9:35, That's Life, and who can resist the offer of some English brandy? Magnus Magnusson is at Preston with more contenders for the title of Mastermind. And at 10:45, Everyman looks at the controversy involving Catholics and sex.
The church is suffering from a celibate psychosis on anything that has to do with sex.
At 11:35, snooker champion Stephen Hendry begins the defence of his Masters title. And this is Sunday evening on BBC1.
Now on BBC1 at 6:15, the latest news with Michael Burke.
Allied aircraft have found the Scud missile launchers that attacked Israel and Saudi Arabia last night. RAF Tornadoes have mounted their first daylight raids into Iraq. And a B-52 comes down in the Indian Ocean. 3 of the crew are missing. Good evening. Allied aircraft found and bombed 2 of the 3 Scud missile launchers that attacked Israel and Saudi Arabia overnight. The Scuds caused no casualties and little damage. The American Military Command says the launchers were attacked before they could move. It also claims to have destroyed at least 68 Iraqi aircraft on the ground by destroying their hardened shelters. But it admitted that 7 American Marines who died on Friday were killed by American fire. The RAF say they've now flown more than 2,000 missions in the last 24 hours. The Tornado fighter bombers have struck a crude oil pumping station in western Iraq, 3 petrochemical plants, and dropped 40 bombs on an Iraqi airfield. RAF Jaguars have attacked ammunition dumps south of Kuwait City and Iraqi artillery on an island off the Kuwaiti coast. The Pentagon says a B-52 bomber has gone down in the Indian Ocean after a bombing raid. 3 of the crew have been rescued, 3 are missing. And an American Marine helicopter has crashed in the desert, killing both pilots. Neither crash is thought to have been caused by enemy fire.
This was one of the Patriots launched to intercept last night's Scud attack on Riyadh. The Iraqi missile was brought down. But its debris, and possibly its warhead as well, landed on a suburb in the city. The explosion blew the front walls off these homes, and a total of 29 people were injured. They were taken to hospital, but are not said to have been seriously hurt. Scud attacks on Saudi Arabia have become less frequent lately, but this one has caused renewed anxiety.
Many people here in Riyadh had assumed they'd seen the last of the Scuds, and the Allied Air Force had reported significant successes in dealing with Saddam Hussein's remaining mobile missile launchers. But it's clear from the evidence here that there's still a considerable amount of work to be done.
Today, residents here have been clearing up after the attack, while the Americans announced that they had managed to find 2 of the 3 launchers from which the Scuds were fired last night against Saudi Arabia and against Israel. The 2 launchers were both attacked and one of them probably destroyed. Allied aircraft are now running regular patrols dedicated to destroying the Scud launchers soon after they've been brought out into the open. That's what happened last night, and the Allies are hoping it will help deter Saddam Hussein from using the Scuds he's still got left.
We have a new approach to it. We're attacking his Scud launches and his Scud sites very, very quickly. And it clearly has to raise the anxiety level in the average man that he knows he's about to be attacked by airstrikes. He is more likely to fire and move quickly.
The RAF have been busy too. In the last 24 hours, their Jaguars have carried out a major attack on Failaka, an island 10 miles from Kuwait City that's of considerable strategic significance, especially if the Allies want to launch an amphibious invasion.
6 gun emplacements posing a threat to both Allied shipping and aircraft needed to be taken out. Jaguars carried out the task using 1,000-pound airburst bombs. The mission appears to have been a complete success.
But from the Americans a short time ago, there was some bleaker news. They confirmed that 7 Marines killed in a border skirmish last week died because of a missile fired from their own side.
What I'm describing for you is a very intense, very close combat, and it appears now that if you look, as we have, at the penetration of the vehicle, it came in on the back left-hand side and went into the engine compartment in the bottom right. So clearly it was an airborne missile, and we have every reason to conclude that it was in fact a friendly missile.
And it was also announced this evening that an American B-52 bomber has crashed with 3 of the crew rescued, but 3 more still missing. Ben Brown, BBC News, Riyadh.
After listing the RAF's 2,000 sorties, their spokesman said that Tornadoes had made their first daylight raids on Iraqi positions. He described Saddam Hussein's overall military position now as hopeless.
Final clearance awaited for a mission in which, for the first time, Tornado pilots will be able to see and be seen. In broad daylight, they will fly over Iraq, drop their 1,000-pound bombs on a military target. As usual, we're given no more detail, and assuming all goes according to plan, fly home again. Day or night, there's still the same pre-flight preparation, the same drill. But as these pilots taxied off, they were launching a new phase in Britain's war effort, an extension of the Tornado bombers' role, which demonstrates Allied confidence that they rule the skies. Back at base, that confidence was apparently justified. The pilots said the target was a smoking heap and there'd been little resistance.
With no tracer, it's hard to know what they're firing. I don't think there was a lot, and there were no missiles, so...
Well, that's good.
That's good.
Excellent. Well done.
Thanks,
well done. 7 out of 8.
7 out of 8, yeah.
Excellent. Excellent.
It's clear sky. You can see the ground very well. Yeah, it was good. Very successful.
What about the ground fire coming back?
Yep, there was a bit of that, I have to say.
Makes a change that you can actually roll and look at the target itself, control the aiming, and make sure that the bombs are going where they're going, as opposed to having the nav look on the radar.
The apparent success of the mission means Tornado bombers will now be on the attack 24 hours a day. Justin Webb, BBC News, Eastern Saudi Arabia.
The Iraqi planes which flew to Iran to escape the fighting were not acting on the orders of Saddam Hussein, according to a senior Iranian politician. Rajai Karasani, the chairman of Iran's Parliamentary Foreign Affairs Committee, said the pilots asked to make emergency landings. No deals had been made beforehand.
Iran's President Rafsanjani sent a senior Iraqi envoy home yesterday with the message that the 90 or so Iraqi warplanes now in Iran are stuck there until the war is over. The reason for the mass evacuation of some of Iraq's best planes remains one of the intriguing mysteries of the war. Now, in an American television interview, a leading Iranian politician says he doesn't believe the flights were ordered by Saddam Hussein.
According to the information we received from the pilots directly and from other sources, we think that they came not under the request or order of President Saddam Hussein. Before the ending of the war, those planes will not leave our land.
This was a surprise to you, they're coming.
This was quite a surprise, yes.
There was no deal made.
There was no deal made.
But if Israel were to respond to the continuing Scud missile attacks and join the war against Iraq, Mr. Khorasani confirms that Iran's neutrality could not then be guaranteed.
It's an entirely new situation. It is not Iraq versus Allied forces. It's an entirely new element in the entire circumstances. And we have to consider it again and again.
The Kuwaiti government in exile has sent a senior minister for talks in Tehran, only 24 hours after the Iraqis were there, part of Iran's policy of active neutrality in the Gulf War.
In Israel, a hardline MP who wants Palestinians expelled from the occupied territories has been appointed to the cabinet. Rehavam Zaebi, a former general, has called for immediate retaliation against Iraq for Scud missile attacks. His appointment is seen as a further swing to the right by the Israeli government.
Both of last night's missiles landed off target and in scrubland in central Israel. This morning, soldiers searched for pieces of a Scud which left a large crater in the ground. The authorities label the area as Zone H, which includes the occupied West Bank. The previous 2 Iraqi missiles to be fired against Israel landed in pro-Palestinian occupied territory. While the Israeli policy of non-retaliation continues, talk in the cabinet this morning was of Mr. Shamir's appointment of a new cabinet minister. The new addition is an ardent right-winger, a member of one of the small religious parties, and someone who not only advocates an immediate attack upon Iraq, but also the expulsion of all Arabs from the occupied territories.
We'll get rid of the Arab population of the territories. Instead of them, we will have Jews that will come from the Soviet Union. They and we and our children will do the job.
Mr. Zaevi's appointment, together with the ominous sound of these rabbis imposing a curse upon Saddam Hussein, may give an impression of a hardening of attitude here. But as yet there's been no change of government policy. It merely awaits Iraq's next move, but threatens a dangerous reaction if attacked with chemical weapons. Michael Macmillan, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Here, the Foreign Secretary Douglas Hurd has said he thinks it's likely that Saddam Hussein will resort to the use of chemical weapons before the fighting is over. The former Prime Minister, Edward Heath, has criticised the United States and Britain for what he called the new imperialism.
With Allied leaders expressing renewed fears about the deployment of chemical weapons, Mr. Hurd warned that their use would provoke a massive response by coalition forces. He put the chance of Saddam Hussein using them at just above 50%.
He's a man who is throwing into the battle week by week the different gambling cards which he has. And if one looks at what he's still got in his hand, if he has the possibility of producing chemical weapons which would actually work, the temptation on him to use them must be increasing.
Mr. Hurd's suggestion that Britain could offer naval and air force units for a post-war peacekeeping force in the Gulf has been strongly criticised by the former Conservative Prime Minister, Edward Heath.
This is the new imperialism, and I'm against the new imperialism. It's not our job to go round the world, throwing our forces round the world all the time, saying this is an evil man, we must get rid of him, this is a bad case, we must get rid of this, and so on. That's not what the new order is about, and that's why I'm so strongly opposed to the new imperialism.
Labour says it'll consider carefully the idea of British involvement in an Arab-led security alliance in the Gulf, but it already wants a larger role for the United Nations once the conflict's over.
There's growing concern that the Allied bombing of chemical weapons plants in Iraq is exposing civilians to serious health risks. A French military spokesman has said thin, toxic clouds of released chemicals have been detected near the Iraqi border, and concentration of chemicals may be much stronger nearer the plants.
A key element in the Allied war tactics has been the precision bombing of various strategic sites inside Iraq. Apart from the airfields, power stations and missile silos, a high target priority has been Iraq's chemical weapons plants. This building in Baghdad was destroyed because the Allies said it was manufacturing chemicals for the war, though the Iraqis have always claimed that it was a baby milk factory. Saddam Hussein has a potent chemical warfare capability with substantial quantities of a number of different nerve gases. But according to the French, the targeting of chemical sites has produced a thin toxic cloud over parts of Iraq. Military spokesman said the wind had dispersed the chemicals, the concentrations were infinitesimal and were having no effect on Allied forces in Saudi Arabia. But some British environmentalists say local people near the bombed plants will almost certainly have died from chemical poisoning and have questioned the ability of bombs to destroy the chemical weapons. The devastating effect of such weapons is well known. Reports say mustard gas used by Saddam Hussein on Kurdish villages in the war with Iran killed thousands and contaminated the soil for more than 2 months.
A group of Indian construction workers has arrived in Jordan with accounts of destruction to the southern Iraqi port of Basra. They spoke of many civilian casualties.
These are the first detailed accounts of life in Basra since the war began, and the impression they give is of a city ravaged by the Allied airstrikes. I was told that apart from destruction to communication centres and government buildings, 2 oil refineries and an oil storage depot were in flames. The sun was permanently obscured by a veil of smoke. In addition, the Allies appeared to be bombing what were described to me as long sheds, used for storing grain and ammunition for the men at the front 100 miles to the south. Many of these had been hit, but in the process, so too had been a number of civilian targets. Several men said independently that a mosque in the Makal quarter had been bombed. They'd heard that at least 12 people inside had been killed. Another man told me he'd seen at least 25 dead civilians.
Troops of the Royal Scots Dragoon Guards preparing for a land battle have been told that they're on the verge of the most momentous experience of their lives. The message came after an intelligence briefing on the impact of Allied air attacks on Iraqi troops. Martin Bell is with the Dragoons.
With their regimental pipes playing, the Royal Scots Dragoon Guards gathered for what could be the last time before they go to war. And in the sort of conditions they expect to be fighting through, dry and dusty, with a stiff wind blowing across the desert. It was an event which, under the reporting restrictions imposed by Whitehall, I may only call a welfare meeting conducted by a welfare officer whose services are much in demand. But it was a chance for the commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel John Sharples, to talk to his men and assure them the home front was with them.
The country in UK is living this war probably more than we are at the moment. They are glued to the television and the newspapers, and they're seeing the Scuds and the artillery raids, and they're seeing much more than we are. And therefore, they really feel very close to us.
And he spoke of the Americans' checklist of targets for their aerial bombardment.
Only then will they commit ground forces. And if they want to take a couple more weeks doing that, that's okay by me.
We know, because we have ways of knowing, that the Allied air offensive is causing great casualties and damage to the other side. That Iraqi command posts, for instance, are pleading for ambulances and even lorries to carry out their wounded. Meanwhile, the Allied forces, including the Royal Scots Dragoon Guards here, just wait for that bombardment to finish.
We are on the verge of meeting with possibly the most momentous experience we will ever experience in our lives.
Different soldiers deal with it differently. The regimental sergeant major, in his way,
I want the Royal Scots Dragoon Guards back, not bits of it, the whole shooting match.
and the officers in theirs. The official photograph, the Royal Scots Dragoon Guards, 1991. This is Martin Bell with 7th Armoured Brigade for the British Television News Pool.
The Air Corps of the British 1st Armoured Division is being put through its paces in northern Saudi Arabia. That means learning to cope with a desert landscape and desert weather.
No hedges, no fences, no telephone wires. Desert flying has its attractions, 10 feet or so above the ground. 3 squadrons from 4 Regiment Army Air Corps have been sharpening their desert flying techniques and learning to live with the sand.
British forces have had to adapt and acclimatise in this desert. Intense heat when they first arrived, torrential rainstorms last month, and now the onset of sandstorms. Something else for the helicopters to deal with.
Lynx and gazelle huddle down as the weather takes another unpleasant turn, but there'll be dust enough when they're added into the Allies' battle attack. Rearmed and refuelled in under 5 minutes, They have tank-busting missiles which can be delivered as they hurtle forward, flowing over the ripples in the sand, specialists in speed and surprise.
Covering the ground at 2 miles a minute, we can appear at one area and then disappear equally quickly to appear 10 miles away in 5 minutes, which cannot be bettered by ground forces.
The waiting game as the air assault on Iraqi positions continues preoccupies the troops, as does the weather. But training, moving into position and the intention to push forward into battle have not lost their drive. The sheer scale of the operation makes it hard to convey its momentum. This is Kate Adey with 1st Armoured Division in northern Saudi Arabia for the British Television News Pool.
The Americans said today that Allied aircraft had flown 41,000 sorties since the start of the war. Mid-air refuelling has been vital to many of those missions, as Fergus Walsh reports.
American tanker planes at an airfield in the southern Arabian Peninsula. Their crews prepare for another support mission to provide mid-air refuelling for fighters on their way to Iraq and Kuwait. These Boeing KC-135s are flying fuel tanks. They carry 80 tons of fuel and no weapons. At a prearranged rendezvous, 3 F-16s loaded with weapons fly up alongside. One by one, they move into position underneath the tanker's refueling probe. The whole refueling process takes just 5 minutes. Another tanker crew will rendezvous with them on their return from enemy territory. By then, most of these weapons will have been launched. This mid-air refueling takes place hundreds of times a day over sea and desert, a vital part of the Allied air operation.
The Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals is sending a team of experts to the Gulf next week to try to save birds and animals affected by the huge oil slick. It's heading towards the Saudi coast and is expected to reach the shore on Tuesday or Wednesday. Wildlife in the Gulf has already been affected by other oil spills, but more devastating pollution is expected. The RSPCA is confident that it can save the lives of thousands of birds. The experts, all volunteers, hope to leave for the Gulf within the next 48 hours. It'll be the first time the RSPCA has worked in a war zone. British airports and airlines have been warned of a possible terrorist plot to put bombs on aircraft. The